there are times where we have every right to be angry. And there are many more times where we actually have no right to be angry, but yet we're still angry. And my theory is that the more you know you are wrong, the angrier you actually get. The more you dig your heels in is because you grow to understand how really wrong you are. And I have often spoken here from this bima about anger, about the danger of anger. I've spoken about the destructive ability, the destructive nature of anger. I have discussed anger as an indication that we might really be feeling something else. Maybe we're afraid of something. I'll tell you this morning, right from the outset, you are going to believe this sermon to be a cop-out. You're going to believe at the end of this sermon there wasn't any deep message here, because there isn't. Today, I don't ask you to do the hard work of soul-searching required of us at this time of the year. I'm not asking for deep introspection. Today, I don't ask you to do the heavy lifting of trying to understand why you're upset, what makes you angry, how come you become frustrated or even anxious. Today, I ask you to do one thing. And that is, in a moment of anger, just take your foot off the gas pedal. Because if we don't learn how to turn down the volume, take our foot off the gas, step away from the fight, learn not to engage with each other in tense moments, there's only one direction that our society is going to go. Being right, winning, isn't the most important thing. There are few circumstances in which winning is critical, and that's when your survival is on the line. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter. When Joshua is ready to take the helm and lead the Jewish people into the promised land, Moses instructs him in what I believe to be one of the most brutal lessons in all of the Torah. Rak me'areh ha'amim ha'ele asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala lo tichyeh kol nishama. He says in verse 17 of chapter 20, when you take over the land, as God has given to you as an inheritance, do not leave a single soul alive. And then it gives us this bizarre phrase, ki hacherem ticharimem, that you should prescribe them. We don't really know what the word cherem means right there. But the JPS translation, what we have in our Chumash, says to prescribe them. That is the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Every one of those are supposed to be cherem, prescribed. What's amazing is the mental gymnastics that our English translation does in order to get to that language of proscription. In the Torah, cherem means one thing, and one thing only in the biblical phrase. It means to completely destroy. It doesn't mean cherem as we grow to understand it in rabbinic literature. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Cherem in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, and in prophets means one thing only, and that is complete and utter destruction. We see it time and time again. We saw it back in the book of Numbers. Vayidor Yisrael neder ladonai vayomer im naton titein et ha'am hazeh biyadi vehacharamti et harehem. You're to deliver this people and destroy their towns entirely. In the book of Samuel, Ko amar Adonai tzvaot pakadati et asher asa Amalek l'Yisrael asher sham lo b'derech ba'alato b'Mitzrayim. In the book of Samuel, it tells us it means complete destruction, destroy the Amalekites. Destroy Amalek the way they sought to seek our destruction. Time and time again in the Torah, we are instructed of the brutality of cherem. We saw it with Amalek. We saw it with Midian. We see it with Moab. Professor Mordechai Kogan, professor of Jewish history at Hebrew University, explained that we know what the word cherem means, not just because we have it in our Torah, but because we have found archaeological evidence, such as statues that the Moabites had constructed, statues that the Assyrians had constructed, in which they used the same cognate of the word cherem, meaning to completely and utterly wipe out. But then there's something bizarre that happens. By the time we get to the rabbinic period, the word has shifted its meaning just a little bit. The rabbis explain, as they do with so many other biblical directives, let's take a step back. It doesn't really mean what the biblical text says it means. The rabbis say, take your foot off the gas pedal. Let's pause for a minute and reevaluate. It couldn't possibly mean what it says it means. It can't possibly mean that the Torah is instructing us that Moses, on God's behalf, is saying, wage war and be completely brutal and vicious in your execution of the enemy. Some of us say it simply can't make sense. We've come further than that as a civilization. War ought not exist, and if it does, maybe we can have some diplomatic resolutions rather than combat on the field. So here the rabbis say what they mean by cherem. Cherem for the rabbis means excommunication, to be shut out of the community. Society has to have rules, and those rules have to be enforced. And when they're broken, there must be consequences. But there also must be compassion in sentencing. The story in the Talmud explains it well. Rabbi Akiva sums it up. A Roman called Turnus Rufus had challenged Rabbi Akiva on the propriety of helping those whom God had chosen to afflict. Why would you help someone who God is punishing? If a king locked someone up in jail and another of his subjects went and freed the prisoner, would such flouting of the king's words not constitute treason? Argued the Roman official. But Rabbi Akiva responded with an audacious counter parable. A king was angry with his son and ordered him to be jailed and deprived of food and drink. One of the subjects disobeyed the king and took food and drink to the prince. And when the king heard, don't you think he would lavish gifts on his fellow who came to his son's rescue? Rabbi Akiva is saying that even in punishment, there has to be compassion. We have to find ways in our society, even in the most dreaded conflicts, to ease off the pedal a little bit and find some compassion. There's another great midrash of Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan. Just as we have found that death is ultimately determined by God, we understand you have to impose a fine nonetheless. He's commenting on another verse in this week's Parsha in which it says, Ayin tachat, ayin shein tachat, shein ragel tachat, ragel, An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a leg for a leg. That can't possibly mean what the Torah says it does. Otherwise, we'd walk around in a society with blind people. So he says, impose a fine instead. Order compensatory damages. But don't take out another person's eye. Take your foot off the gas. And so this morning's Parashat says cherem. Complete and absolute destruction. The rabbis say, no, step back a little bit. Know that cherem is a significant punishment. Isolation is difficult. It has significant financial and emotional consequences. But certainly capital punishment is within the Torah. And this would be a wonderful opportunity for me to launch into a sermon about the moral consequences of an industrialized first world country that still imposes the death penalty. He certainly could give a sermon about what capital punishment looks like in this country as opposed to other developed countries. But I promised you no deep sermon this morning. While this would be a wonderful opportunity for me to express my disgust at the idea that we still execute people in this country, and this would be a wonderful opportunity for me to discuss the horrific nature of war that we see unfolding in the Ukraine, I prefer, as I mentioned earlier, to offer a more subtle message. And the critical message this morning for you is we have to find a way to tone down our most base instincts. The critical lesson is we have to find a way to combat our own bloodthirst. January 6th is a day that will go down in infamy. Not because of an external enemy that thought to attack us on our own shores, but because we have found an internal threat within our country that is equally destructive, our inability to tone down our rhetoric. What have we come to as neighbors in this country? We have the ability to choose to gaslight, or we have the opportunity to dampen the flames of anger seething within our world and burning within ourselves. Gaslighting is real. It's a psychological manipulation in which the abuser attempts to sow self-doubt and confusion in their victim's mind. Typically, gaslighters are seeking to gain power and control over another person by distorting reality and forcing them to question their own judgment and intuition. And it's real, and it has power. Two examples are, if someone says to you, "Are you sure about that?" Or, "Maybe you have a bad memory. I think you're forgetting what really happened." Just the sound of those sentences, even when completely detached from any interaction, begins to stir emotions. You know you felt it as soon as I said it. Are you sure? Maybe you have a bad memory. Identifying that feeling early and choosing to act differently is extremely powerful. And so I say to you this morning, the power is in your hands. Don't relinquish your power, your control to another because you have become angry. Today I ask you to do Today I don't ask you to do the hard work of soul searching required, of deep introspection that this season requires. Today I don't ask you to do the heavy lifting of trying to understand what makes you upset or angry or frustrated or even anxious. Today I ask you to do one thing. Take your foot off the gas. Because if we don't learn to lower the volume, step away from the fight, learn not to engage with each other in tense moments, there's only one direction this tension will go, There's only one direction our world will go in. Being right, winning, isn't the most important thing. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We continue with Musaf. It's introduced by the Chatzi Kaddish, page 184. Please rise.